Welcome to the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel, and on today's episode, I'm speaking with Dr. Kana Grace, a research psychologist, advocate, specialist mentor, and educator specializing in the mental and physical health of neurodivergent people. Currently, Kana is an Honorary Research Fellow at the Center for Research in Autism and Education at the Institute of Education, University College London, where she completed her PhD. Kana has lived experiences with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, dyspraxia, hypermobility, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, and Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, or MCAS. She founded Valtameri, which means ocean in Finnish, to advocate for and support neurodivergent people and their families based in Okinawa, Japan. Through Valtameri, she offers one-on-one support for neurodivergent people of all ages. She also gives talks and public lectures to deepen the understanding of neurodivergence in Okinawa, Japan, and all over the world. Fluent in both English and Japanese, Kana bridges cultures in her extensive work. Kana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for welcoming me, Caroline.
I'm really excited to talk with you about your experience as a researcher and your lived experience with multiple neurodivergencies. So to start out, how did you discover that you're neurodivergent?
Yeah, so my story of discovering that I was neurodivergent really started from discovering that I was autistic. So it all started from seeing a school counselor in my second year in my university here in Japan. And then she recommended me to see a psychiatrist. So I went to see him, and he diagnosed me with several mental health conditions. And so I thought I was mentally ill. And then I took a break from the university and I eventually quit the university. But I really wanted to be someone like the school counselor I saw in the university. So I asked how did she study to become a counselor? And she said, I went to Columbia University, Teachers College in New York. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go there and to study counseling psychology and to be just like her, helping other students struggling through their university life and life in general. So I decided to transfer to another university, but not Columbia directly, but I transferred to Northeastern University in Boston. And then I actually got admitted to Columbia University Teachers College for Master in Mental Health Counseling. But while I was in Boston, it's really Boston and New York is very close. It's just a bus ride from each other. So I went to visit New York City, and I discovered it's too huge. I couldn't cope with the atmosphere there. I really like the campus itself, but outside of it, it's really Manhattan. So I decided to stay in Boston and went to Boston College. And during that time, I heard from my mom about one autistic woman. So my mom was at a lecture by her, and she talked about that autistic woman talked about her experiences, and her experiences were very similar to mine. So my mom called me on the phone. She was in Japan, I was in Boston. So she called me and said, look, her experiences are very similar to yours, and maybe we should look into autism or Asperger's syndrome, which was the term people used a lot back then. So that was the start of my story of autism, and I got a diagnosis of autism in 2017 during my master's at Boston College, but it took actually more than 10 clinicians in total to get there.
Wow.
And after that, I started my PhD, and I found my hyperactivity, restlessness, and not being able to focus and not being able to read. That's always been an issue for me in my life, my whole life. But during my PhD, doing research, that became a huge problem. And I went to see a psychiatrist to see if I had ADHD. And if so, I wanted to see if some medications could work for me. So I went to see a psychiatrist and I got a diagnosis of ADHD, dyslexia, and Tourette. And then later, because I was seeing so many various doctors for various symptoms throughout my body, like headaches, fainting for no reasons, and stomach aches, etc., etc. But I didn't get any answers for it. But then I remembered so many people I encountered in the neurodivergent community told me about hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I started to search the term and I started to see a lot of common traits that I had with that diagnosis. And I went through the diagnostic process this year. And yeah, I discovered about symptomatic hypermobility and other related issues like
Wow. And so your discovery really didn't start until you were in university. So you went through your
yeah.
whole childhood sort of, not knowing you were neurodivergent,
Mhm.
but still having those experiences. Looking back, were there things that you kind of look back on growing up and saying like, oh yeah, that was something that was a challenge for me that I didn't understand, but now it makes more sense?
Yeah, there were so many things. Looking back, there were so many funny stories that I thought that were normal, but that wasn't because everyone experienced their own things and they think that's normal because we don't know what other people are experiencing. So, for example, I always had severe headache after school, and I thought that was normal, but that wasn't. And later, I discovered that a lot of autistic people seem to have that stress, nervous headache after being surrounded by a lot of people. And I had very severe asthma. I nearly died several times when I was a child.
Wow.
And so I went to the hospital so many times. I spent so many hours in the hospital when I was younger. But that asthma is actually related to the MCAS or hypermobility, and it's all related. So I'm starting to discover that there is a link to everything. So it's very interesting process.
Yeah. I found that a lot of people who are neurodivergent, it's usually just not one neurotype. They usually have multiple neurotypes or multiple experiences like autism and ADHD occur a lot together,
Mhm.
along with more physical conditions like hEDS and MCAS and POTS are, as you said, they often co-occur. I think for reasons that we don't quite understand, but that is a somewhat common experience. Wow. Wow. So you've been through university, you've gotten your PhD. How did you become interested in conducting research specifically that focuses on autistic adults?
Yeah, so the interest in autism and autistic adults actually came from my diagnostic process itself and also from my lived experiences. And my PhD research specifically focused on loneliness in autistic adults. And that was because I was interested in social connection, social connectedness of people. And I felt that there is such a misunderstanding that autistic people don't mind being alone, don't mind being lonely, or don't even experience loneliness because they like to be alone. But as an autistic person, I felt, well, that's not true because people don't understand that we feel lonely. But I felt we need some scientific backup to help our lived experience in part. So I decided to research on this specific topic, loneliness in autistic adults.
And what have been some of your most meaningful findings out of that research or research from other topics that you may have done as well?
Yeah, so from my PhD on loneliness in autistic adults, one of the meaningful findings was that a lack of social understanding and acceptance of autism underpins loneliness in autistic adults. And another thing was that loneliness in autistic adults centers around the internal conflict dilemma between wanting to connect and finding it difficult to do so. So we as autistic people knew it already before I conducted the research, but presenting that scientific evidence is really powerful to make people believe our experiences. And from the same study, same qualitative study that I did with 203 autistic adults, based on the findings, I developed the paradoxical loneliness loop model to explain loneliness in autistic adults. So that's basically a very simple explanation about loneliness. So it starts from having a desire for connection and still have barriers to have those connections, and finding social interaction exhausting, and exhaustion itself becomes a barrier, and we avoid social interactions, and then we feel lonely, and therefore we need social connection. So it's a cycle that we can't get out of. So I called it paradoxical loneliness loop. But there is a hope that we have several ways that autistic people tend to make meaningful relationships, like people with similar interests or similar hobbies, sometimes with other autistic people, or not just with humans, but also with animals or nature, or specific one person, sometimes like a parent or partner.
Yeah, there's all different ways to make those connections.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you looked at this in your research, but did you have any findings of if autistic people connect better or more easily with other autistic people? Does that make a difference, or does it really just depend on shared interests and other factors?
Yeah, I didn't specifically explore this topic, but my research definitely showed that similar interests, similar people, like-minded people tend to make meaningful relationships with each other. So that included other autistic people, autistic peer group. But I think your question is actually related to double empathy problem that people call in academia. It's not that autistic people lack empathy, but communication is always a two-way process. So we autistic people tend to may misunderstand non-autistic people, but non-autistic people also may misunderstand us, and vice versa. So a lot of research actually by autistic researchers have shown that autistic relationships, interactions seem to work better than autistic non-autistic relationships.
Yeah, that is really interesting how that comes through. And yeah, the double empathy issue is definitely something that I've been learning about more recently as something that really plays a role. And especially it plays a role in sort of depathologizing the views of autistic people and the stereotypes about, you know, quote unquote problems with social interactions, because a lot of it is just double empathy, and that often we socialize differently, and sometimes those challenges disappear when we're with other autistic people. So yeah, I think that's important. And I think it's also important to have more autistic researchers doing this research, because for so long it was non-autistic people doing the research, and you get a lot of sort of pathologizing and just looking at things very negatively. And I think that it's important, like researchers like you, it's just so important to be doing this research. And I'm excited that in the last few years, there's been more and more autistic researchers doing research on these topics.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I totally agree. I know there are lots of non-autistic autism researchers as well, and their presence is important as well. They have their own strengths. We have our own weakness as well. And I hope that we can try to work better with each other, because currently sometimes autistic researchers feel not as powerful as other non-autistic researchers to get our voices out or to get more experiences in academia, for example.
Yeah, that's true. We definitely need to work together. We need researchers who are autistic and non-autistic looking at these and really looking at it from like a neurodiversity or neurodivergent affirming perspective. And I know that that's something that is part of your research approach as well. And I think I wanted to understand better about what that really means in terms of doing research. So I guess, like, what does it mean to be neurodiversity affirming as a researcher, and why is that so important?
Yeah, so I think neurodiversity affirming research is to do research that is important and meaningful to neurodivergent people and to do research with neurodivergent people as much as the fundings and time allow. So we tend to call this co-production, but full co-production is not always possible because of the constraints of the fundings or time in research. And I've actually found it really difficult to do the true co-production because I think if we do co-production, we actually need to pay neurodivergent co-producers in research, those people with lived experiences, because their experiences, expertise are important, and we need to show that respect. If we do that as voluntary position, it's not the same, I feel. And also, I think to make research neurodiversity affirming, it's also about making engagement of neurodivergent people as inclusive as possible, like ways of communication. So, for example, maybe you don't have to go into some labs in person. Maybe we can do something like this on Zoom.
That makes a lot of sense. And again, really focusing on topics that are important to the autistic community
Yeah.
and really meaningful is a big part of that. And then how you conduct the research as well. Absolutely. So your career has been in academia, and I personally have never worked in academia. I'm sure it has its own specific challenges, and I from what I've heard, it can sometimes be quite high pressure, especially if you need to publish and you're a researcher. But I'm curious about your experience, like especially like what's it like being a neurodivergent person who's working in academia?
Yeah, so I've been in university settings for so long since my undergraduate. So it's been almost 10 years. So it's what it is for me. So I don't know what outside looks like, what it's like to work in other settings. But I've worked with other researchers, including those who are also clinicians. And my experiences have been mixed, I think. So what I've learned, as sad as it sounds, people without lived experiences don't actually understand.
Mhm.
So professionals, including researchers, think they do, but they don't. So I work nearly exclusively with those with lived experiences now, and it's intentional. So then those professionals tend to miss the opportunity to support neurodivergent people in front of them. They they're looking at the big picture and they're trying to help the community. So they have the good intention, but not making positive impacts on someone someone's life.
Mhm.
After all, like many academics tend to be after their own interests, not for the interests of neurodivergent people they say they are working for. So that's something I've felt quite deeply. But another thing I could say about working in academia is something I benefited so much in academia, and that was specialist mentoring. So I had a specialist mentor during my PhD in the UK. And that was the first time I had this kind of support because I didn't know this kind of support existed in Japan or in the US. And my specialist mentor was a really great help, a huge help during my PhD. So now I extend that same support to other neurodivergent people. So this kind of support is usually for those in higher education settings in the UK. And outside of the UK, there aren't really that kind of support available. So I wanted to expand this support beyond the border of the UK and also beyond the border of higher education settings. Because when people go into employment, that's when they find less support compared to when they're in educational settings.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't heard that term before, specialized mentor. And I'm someone who's lived and grown up in the United States. So, we have the concept of mentorship, but I hadn't heard that term. And from you describing it, it sounds like something incredibly helpful for students, especially neurodivergent students, but probably many other students as well, to help them kind of get through their education and prepare them for whatever they wind up doing afterwards. How is it different from sort of general mentoring? Is it very focused on certain topics or very structured? Like, what does that look like?
So the kind of support I got during my PhD was called specialist autism mentoring. And there is another version, it's called specialist mental health mentoring, or something like that. And I myself call my service as specialist neurodivergence mentoring. So each of that support focuses on specific thing, autism, mental health, neurodivergence. So for example, the support includes managing daily tasks or making schedule together to make a feasible plan for an exam or managing stress, managing anxiety. And also another thing I deal with a lot in my own mentoring practice is to help neurodivergent people to go through the burnout cycle,
Yeah.
because that's something people find really difficult. And I've had that myself, definitely. So yeah, that's something we do in mentoring.
Yeah, that's great because I know many neurodivergent people do struggle well, in school probably throughout, but imagine in university, at least in the United States, there are some supports, but I feel like these days it's even less than we have in like our primary and secondary schools. And the student really has to be proactive in asking for things like accommodations. And I don't really think we have a lot of people who are assigned to help mentor in very specific ways and help with those. So I think that would help a lot of neurodivergent students stay in university and improve our graduation rates, because a lot of people do wind up leaving because of burnout or other struggles like that. So yeah, that's really great. You've lived in many different countries. You currently live in Japan, you've lived in the UK, you've lived in the US. What attitudes or general sentiments about neurodivergence have you noticed, mainly in Japan? And then we can talk about how that compares to other countries that you've observed.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Japan, in mainland Japan, and I did my undergraduate and master's in Boston in the US, and I did my PhD in London in the UK. So from my experiences, I feel in Japan, a lot of attitudes towards neurodivergence is quite medical deficit model. Many research projects actually try to find causes or cure neurodivergence. So that really makes me really angry when looking at the research projects and descriptions. And the language they use is also an issue, I feel. So we call autism jiheisho in Japanese, and it literally means self-closed disorder. So I think it should be replaced with autism in the Kana form,
Mm-hmm.
just following autism in English. So I've felt the UK is leading the way in terms of neurodiversity affirmative work. in research and practice. So including specialist mentoring support and that as well. And also involving lived experiences, people with lived experiences in important decision making and promoting co-production.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of society's view of neurodivergence or autism specifically, in Japan, is it sort of similar to like the medical deficit model? I mean, I know that's a very big generalization about an entire country and culture, but I guess what have you observed compared to other countries in that way?
Yeah. So for example, on media, when autism or other neurodivergence are featured on, for example, on documentaries or news, they use very sad music to it, and they make people feel sorry for neurodivergent people or autistic people. And I really don't think that's the attitude we need for neurodivergence nor autism. So we don't need people feeling sorry for us, but we need more understanding, more acceptance. And I think a lot of negative things about being autistic, being neurodivergent are featured on media, whereas strengths are not featured, strengths are not treated very well here. And also, I think there is a cultural aspect to it as well, that in educational settings, children are expected to do the same thing as other students, the same subject, at the same pace, same homework, same goals, and usually similar kinds of aimed universities to go. So we seem to have the same expectations for every one of students when we have different needs, different strengths. So that's a problem.
It's interesting how it compares across cultures, and yeah, absolutely. I think really across the world we could definitely use more understanding, and I know that's what a lot of your research ultimately will help understanding and more acceptance and appreciation of autistic and other neurodivergent people as well. What goals do you want to achieve through your research, whether it's other topics you want to look at or other impacts you want to have with it? What kind of goals would you have with that?
So my overall goal in my research is to provide scientific evidence to make people, make society believe the experiences of neurodivergent people, and to make and treat our lived experiences more seriously. And my current interest in research is in physical health in neurodivergent people, particularly connective tissue disorders, because I have them and also my mom has them. And interestingly, I knew about connective tissue disorders since I was in my first grade. So I was 6, and my mom was very, very sick because of connective tissue disorders. So I went to the hospital with her so many times, but I didn't understand what was going on. That was too complicated for me. But now I started to understand the overlap between connective tissue disorders and neurodivergence, and then see also a connection within my family, myself, and also my mom. And I think to have more and more passion for this topic. But yeah, it also is not just my interest, but it's also the interest of community when I do the research. So I want to know more about this topic, and also if this has a potential to prove lived experiences as scientific evidence or things like that. Because my overall aim is always and has always been to make our lived experiences hard and be treated more seriously.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And it sounds like the research that you're doing now and that you're planning to do will be incredibly helpful to the community, because a lot of these are things that people are struggling with and are topics that are not well understood by many, many people. So I think that's really going to be a big help. Well, that's great. Wow. Well, Kana, thank you so much for sharing your own story and talking about all of the great research that you're doing. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the kind of work that you do?
Yeah. So for more about my work, it's all on my link tree. So you can look at my link tree and also keep in touch via Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. And for any inquiries, like regarding one-to-one specialist mentoring support or future talks, you can get in touch with me via my organization website, Valtameri. That is also on my link tree.
Okay, great. I'll put your link tree in the show notes so that people can contact you through that. That's great. As we close out, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything that they can help or support you with?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I'm actually launching a course on neurodivergent health next year, and I will announce the details on my social media outlets soon. So please join me in the course because I'm very excited for this course. I'm spending so much time on making and developing the course. So I hope, and I'm sure it will be a great course. And it will be a unique, one of a kind course as I speak from my experiences as a researcher, practitioners, as a mentor, and most of all, as a person with lived experiences. So the course is for anyone who wants to learn more about health in neurodivergent people, social, mental, and physical health, all of them. And I expect clinicians, educators, neurodivergent people, and their family members to join me.
That's awesome. And will that course be open to anyone around the world?
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, all. And
Awesome.
I hope to accommodate the time zone as well.
Mhm. That's fabulous. Well, Kana, again, it's been really great talking with you. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show.
So thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.